Hello. How's everyone doing tonight? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Glad you're here. Figured I would just do a bit of an evening chat for you. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, the holiday. Today is the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. Friday will be the infamous Black Friday, but it won't be much of a Black Friday. There won't be a lot of shopping going on because of the pandemic, but I'm here. I've got this beautiful painting behind me, and I'm ready to have a lovely chat with you this evening. Got some fun opening remarks, and from there, I'll do my roll call, and then I will answer your super chat questions, and then I'll be heading home in the cold weather, and that'll be fine. Because I enjoy talking to you. You all are a source of deep love and satisfaction for me. Being able to get on here and answer your questions and engage with you gives me real pleasure. It is something I do because I enjoy it. I am being blatantly honest here. I did these lives because I enjoy them. And my hope is that I will continue doing them because I enjoy them. But happy Thanksgiving. Keep up your remarkable work. Well, thank you, Long Warren. And, I do enjoy what I'm doing here. And the more people that join us, the more fun we have. So now's the time to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Share this on Reddit, share this on Twitter, share this on Facebook, go into communist Facebook groups, and post this, and get everyone to join. Aha, Marx versus Bakunin versus LaSalle. Marx, Bakunin versus LaSalle. LaSalle, post-left trend. Yeah, keep the super chats rolling in, folks. I will answer them all. And tonight, instead of talking about news, right? Because I talk about news all the time. Right? I report the news for international television all the time. Instead of doing that, I thought that tonight would be a great night, a great night, to just talk frankly about things that we all should know that unfortunately we do not, and the arguments that I have been having for decades that I should not have to have. There are some things that many of us know, many of us have heard me say many times, but most of the world does not know. And because most of the world does not know these things, we have a big problem. If most of the world knew what I'm about to say, which is quite obvious, we would be in a much better situation. But because most of the world, I should say most of the United States, I think most of the world more or less knows these things. Most of the United States does not know these things. Because of that, we are facing a very big problem. Folks, once again, like always, I always end up arguing with some libertarian or ardent believer in capitalism on Twitter. And inevitably, the ardent defender of capitalism will say that socialism has failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Every time, like clockwork. This comes out like clockwork. This argument comes forward. That is false. That is overwhelmingly false. 1917, Russia was an agrarian country, 60% illiteracy, very little industry. Most of the population did not have running water. Most of the population did not have electricity. By 1936, The Soviet Union was a global industrial superpower. The Soviet Union had the biggest power plants in the world, the biggest steel mills in the world. The Soviet Union wiped out illiteracy in the country, built new universities, universal employment. I mean, by 1936, the Soviet Union was head and shoulders above where it had been when it was a capitalist country. So that alone, by about 1936, it was abundantly clear that socialism does in fact work. Of course, the Soviet Union had problems. No one denies that the Soviet Union had problems. But it was pretty clear in 1936, new Superman movie, Superman, USSR. It's pretty clear, pretty clear. By about 1936, after Stalin had implemented the 5-year economic plans, mobilized the population to build at a rapid pace, it was pretty clear that socialism worked. But, just in case there was some doubt about it, maybe you argue that the Soviet Union and the 5-year plans was just some weird historical anomaly. Keep in mind that after the Soviet Union had rapidly industrialized with the 5-year plans, wiped out illiteracy, provided universal, housing, universal education. Hollywood 10, thanks, Dan. After that, after they had industrialized the country, after Shostakovich was composing some of the greatest music in history, after Sergei Eisenstein was making some of the greatest films in history, after they had a huge explosion in the arts and in gymnastics, after they built the world's largest hydroelectric power plant facility, after they were producing more steel than any other country in the world, after they had all these huge economic achievements, then this thing happened called World War II. And no other country in the world lost as many people as the Soviet Union did in World War II. Some people say 20 million, some people say the number is closer to 26 million. The whole country was destroyed. But following the Second World War, they rebuilt, again, using mobilization of the population, state central planning. They rebuilt the country after World War II. And then they launched Sputnik. No other country in the world had ever launched a spacecraft before, and they launched it. And then they had the first man into outer space. No other country in history had ever put a man into outer space. The Soviet Union put Yuri Gagarin into outer space. Now, I'm not going to go on. I could go on for a long time about the Soviet Union's achievements. But by 1936, it was very clear that socialism worked. After World War II, it was once again clear that socialism worked. Socialism made the Soviet Union into a global industrial superpower. So socialism works. But let's not stop there. In 1949, China was a deeply poor country. They called it the sick man of Asia. Malnutrition-related deaths happened all the time. There were famines in which millions of people died. Western corporations and British bankers dominated China. Russian Eurasianists. All right, wrote that down. 1949, China had a socialist revolution. The Communist Party came to power. 5-year economic plans, mobilized the population, built new power plants, started moving against illiteracy, started providing health care. 1978, they launched the Reform and Opening Up, shifted their policies to start facilitating Western investment, but maintained a state centrally planned economy with 5-year plans, with government-controlled banks, government-controlled industries. Today, in China, which has a communist party ruling it, which has a 5-year economic plan, which has a huge amount of government-owned industries, huge amount of government-run banks, where even the private sector is not really private because the government can walk in at any time and order them to do things they don't want to do. Even the private sector doesn't do what the market dictates. They are forced to obey the state. And most of the big corporations in the private sector are controlled by the government. Huawei Technologies, great example. Huawei Technologies, its board of directors is Chinese military. It depends on government subsidies. It has it is an example of profit sharing working according to Harvard Business Review. So even the big companies that are nominally private are not really private. China has a socialist economy. China is now, at this point, the largest economy in the world. It was the second largest until the pandemic, but now, because of our slowdown in the United States, some economists are arguing. Statistics indicate that at this point, the Chinese economy is larger than the U.S. economy. I'm not ready to go there yet, but they are at least the second largest economy in the world. So Russia, with socialism, grew into being a tremendous economic superpower. China, with socialism, grew into being a tremendous economic superpower. But let's not stop there. Central America, not too far from the United States. In Central America, you have free market countries like Honduras. Until 2009, Honduras, in 2009, Honduras had a socialist president, Manuel Zelaya, but the United States government overthrew him. There was a coup. And since then, Honduras has had a free market government. And Honduras is a mess politically. Mass poverty, mass suffering, narco gangs, highest murder rate in the world, according to some. It's a mess. Free market, Honduras, mess. Guatemala. We saw protests going on there. They just burned the House of the Congress. Mass poverty, mass unemployment, mass suffering, narco gang chaos, a lot of people in the country without running water, lots of people in the country without electricity, lots of people that are illiterate, that don't speak Spanish, rather speak an indigenous language, can't read or write. That's Guatemala, free market country. There was a brutal dictator there in the 1980s called Rios Montt, who was backed by the United States as he committed genocide against the indigenous people. He was put on trial for that recently, and then, the charges against him were dropped on a technicality, so he faced no punishment. That's Guatemala, miserable free market country. Nicaragua, socialist country, led by the Sandinistas, right? The government that the United States and Ronald Reagan tried to overthrow. Daniel Ortega, Rosario Murillo have a socialist government in Nicaragua. Huge strides in reducing poverty. They've wiped out illiteracy. They have enabled many Nicaraguans to start their own businesses. They have built infrastructure. They're even talking about building a canal that would be an alternative to the Panama Canal. Nicaragua, the socialist country, is doing way better than the capitalist countries. Cuba, right? People always say, oh, Cuba's so bad. Compare Cuba with its healthcare system that's studied all over the world, with its, universal employment, universal literacy. Compare Cuba with Haiti, the free market country, with the Dominican Republic, also a free market country. It's pretty clear that socialism works, folks. Cuba is a small island, and it has a literacy system and a literacy education system that's admired all over the world. Cuba is a small island, and it has, according to Ban Ki-moon, good books. According to Ban Ki-moon, Cuba has the world's greatest medical school. It has a medical system that's studied all over the world. Socialism works. It turns impoverished countries into superpowers. Case in point, Russia and China. It eliminates illiteracy. It provides tremendous health care. It provides universal employment. It builds infrastructure. It raises people out of poverty. Right? The highest rate of GDP growth in South America during the last few years, up until the recent coup, was in Bolivia. A state centrally planned economy in Bolivia where the government controlled the natural gas and the mining, and the state planned out the economy, wiped out illiteracy in Bolivia, built roads all throughout Bolivia, constructed things, had the highest rate of GDP growth in South America. Like, all over the world, you can see examples of socialism working. Socialism works. I mean, it works. I mean, what was China like before socialism? What is China like now? Socialism works. What was Russia like before socialism? What is Russia like now? Socialism works. Right? In fact, the fall of the Soviet Union. Let's talk about that. Another example, during the time of the Soviet Union, they were experiencing economic growth. The fall of the Soviet Union happens. They adopt free market policies. Immediately, they start having big economic problems. Mass poverty, mass suffering. And how was it that the problems of the free market Yeltsin era were resolved? Well, Vladimir Putin got in and once again centered the economy around the government and basically used two giant state-controlled energy corporations, Gazprom and Rosneft, as a way to restart the economy. So I'm waiting for the part where socialism doesn't work. I'm waiting. But I hear this from people all the time. And people still believe this. Socialism doesn't work. Socialism doesn't work. It works. Does it have problems? Of course it has problems. Have innocent people suffered in socialist societies? Of course. Have there been prison camps in social? Of course. But does socialism create huge amounts of economic growth? Yes. Does socialism wipe out illiteracy? Yes. Does socialism reduce poverty? Overwhelmingly. Does socialism industrialize countries? Yes. Does socialism, create inventions? Yes. Socialism works. There are some things in this world that are true, and there are some things in this world that are not. Socialism doesn't work is not true. China before socialism, China now. Russia before socialism, Russia at the height of the Soviet Union, right? Russia when it had free market policies after the fall of the Soviet Union, compared to the Soviet Union. Socialism works. Compare Cuba to Haiti. Compare Nicaragua to Honduras and Guatemala. Compare Bolivia to the rest of Latin America, right? Venezuela, they've had their problems. They've had huge achievements. I've been to Venezuela. I've seen whole neighborhoods where the people would have, lived in shacks if it weren't for government-controlled loans and interest-free loans from the government that created the whole neighborhoods. Socialism works. You can say these things. You can say them, but they're just not true. Socialism works. And I hate to repeat myself. I hate to sound like a broken record, but this is so obviously true. So obviously true that it shocks me that people cannot see this. And when you argue with people about this, they'll say, never has socialism ever accomplished anything. And you'll just tell them what you just told you. And then they'll go, oh yeah, but. And it's like, no, not oh yeah, but. You made a broad historical statement, and you said it with full confidence. And I blew it out of the water. There's no yeah, but. If someone says socialism doesn't work, They are lying. They are wrong. There's no yeah, but. If you say that socialism doesn't work as an economic system, you are wrong. Period. Not yeah, but. Not yeah, but the gulag. No. Not, oh yeah, well, no. If you say that socialism does not work, you are wrong. You are wrong, you are wrong, you are wrong, you are wrong. And it is like as obvious as night and day. This should be common sense. Like, it's not that difficult to see that China before the Communist Party was dirt poor and China with the Communist Party was doing pretty darn well. Not that hard to see. The Soviet Union was the first in outer space, had huge industrial achievement. Not that hard to see. Not that hard to see that Cuba's medical system is loved all over the world. It's pretty basic, obvious facts. There's no yeah buts. There's no yeah, but only because. No. And the fact that that doesn't stop people dead in their tracks is something I fail to comprehend. Okay, Elon Musk. It is something I fail to comprehend. I just do not understand. I do not understand how anyone can say socialism does not work, number one. And then number two, I cannot understand why. When I argue with people about this, and the argument begins with socialism does not work, and then I tell them everything I just told them, they go, oh yeah, but. Like, no, you repeated a statement with confidence that is so obviously false, and in a few quick sentences, I showed you why what you said was wrong. And you don't do a double take? This doesn't make you rethink? This doesn't make you go, wow, I've been lied to? Wow, my whole worldview is based on a big lie? I mean, it is beyond me how people can say this, number one. But number two, how people can have that sentence debunked so quickly and not completely reconsider their worldview. Someone telling you that socialism doesn't work is like someone telling you that Adolf Hitler is still alive. Adolf Hitler is dead, and socialism works. If someone told you that Hitler was still alive, Pentagon versus CIA. If someone told you that Adolf Hitler was still alive, and you quickly discovered that Adolf Hitler died in 1945, you would not take that person seriously as a source on history. But these people, they say the conversation starts with socialism never worked anywhere. Then you show them that China, Russia, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, right? You can even talk about Syria, talk about Libya. My gosh, socialism works. Libya, when it was socialist, was the most prosperous country on the African continent. Now that Libya is capitalist, people are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. No country on the African continent had anywhere near the high life expectancy that Muammar Gaddafi and Islamic socialism created in Libya. I mean, Syria, Ba'athist Arab socialism, huge rates of economic growth, poverty alleviation, wiping out illiteracy. I mean, many examples of this. Of socialism working. Socialism raising people out of poverty. But You'll argue with somebody, and you'll point out what I just quickly pointed out. And it doesn't mean anything to them. It doesn't mean anything to them. They go, oh, okay, well, maybe it worked there, but you see, there was this, yeah, it's like, no, the conversation needs to end right there. If you cannot do a big double take at that point, if at that point you don't go, holy shit, you're right, you're not thinking. At that point, you absolutely have to do a big double take, because this socialism doesn't work stuff is everywhere, and it's easily deconstructed. It is about as easy to take apart as a castle made out of Legos. I mean, it is so obviously false. But of course, you'll point all this out. And then the conversation goes to, yeah, but socialist countries violated human rights. They're not engaging with me in good faith, says Nicholas Lynch. Well, clearly. Most socialist countries violated human rights. No shit, Sherlock. No shit, Sherlock. And capitalist countries have violated human rights, and feudalist countries have violated human rights, and the Roman Empire that was slavery has violated human rights, and, countries violate human rights. That happens. And that's not good. We're in favor of people having the maximum amount of economic human rights, but, maybe when countries are fighting for their lives and barricaded and blockaded and invaded and facing constant CIA coup attempts, might make sense that they're a little more authoritarian. But even regardless, that's not even a relevant point. One could have socialism and not violate human rights. So that's not even a relevant point. But then you'll get, well, real capitalism has never existed anywhere. And it's like these people are just so desperate to hold on to a lie. America's economic discourse is premised on this lie. If it weren't for the population overwhelmingly believing that socialism doesn't work, they would never have gotten away with schools for profit, charter schools, private prisons, private military contractors. They never would have gotten away with that. They never would have gotten away with so many of the things that they've done if it weren't this big lie. All economic discourse in the United States, all debate in the United States is based on this lie. It's all based on this lie. There would be no libertarianism if it weren't for this lie. There would be no conservatism. This lie is the basis of free market politics. If they did not have this big lie, they'd have nothing. And that is why I find it absolutely egregious that there are socialists who repeat this lie. I'm not telling you have to agree with everything the Soviet Union did or everything Cuba does or everything China does, but it's when your response to people who say socialism failed everywhere it's ever been tried is, that's true, but shut up. It is beyond me. The majority of people in the United States who call themselves socialists, if you say to them, everywhere communism's ever been tried, all it resulted in is everyone getting poorer. Look at China, they're poorer because of communism. Look at the Soviet Union, no one ever accomplished anything. If you say that to the majority of people calling themselves socialists, they give you an answer that is, That's true, but shut up. Shut up. I would rather have you spew doctrinaire anti-communism than say that. That is you should donate money to the Heritage Foundation. That is what you're doing when you say that's true, but when you let the lie of the 20th century go through unchallenged, when someone says something so obviously false, communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried, and you go, oh, that's true, but shut up. Just shut up. Don't talk. I would rather have you on the other side than have you in the socialist movement. Because the entire basis of everything, absolutely everything wrong in this country, is that big lie. And if you cannot refute that, I went to school, I learned in school, communism failed everywhere it's ever been tried. I heard from my parents, I heard on TV, I heard everywhere, communism's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. That is objectively false. And if you can't possibly bring yourself to just go, that is false, what are you doing? How are you contributing in any way to the defeat of capitalism? It is beyond me. Folks, I wanted to share a little aspect of this. So, one of the arguments that libertarians make routinely, all the time, is, isn't it funny that socialists are against capitalism, but they have iPhones? Now, that doesn't even make any sense if you know anything. But if you were one of them, only capitalism could create an iPhone. Only capitalism could create an iPhone. No other system could ever make an iPhone. Well, there are about 3 ways to sink that. There are 3 things that they should immediately hear if they make that statement. 1, LED lights were invented in the Soviet Union. iPhones have LED screens. So the screen on your iPhone was derived from technology invented in the Soviet Union. 1. 2, the first mobile phone in history was invented in 1957 in the Soviet Union. So the mobile phone part of the iPhone wouldn't have come into existence if it weren't for the Soviet Union. 3, the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world and the top producer of smartphones is Huawei Technologies, a state-controlled corporation, a profit-sharing cooperative subsidized and created by the Chinese government. So, socialists invented the screen of the phone, socialists invented the phone part of the phone, and socialist institutions are making more phones than capitalism. So the people that say that are so utterly wrong. Utterly wrong. Socialists invented the technology to make the iPhone, and socialists produce smartphones better than capitalists do. So no, I mean, they should just shut up immediately. But I wanted to share with you, the reason that I'm frustrated with the socialist movement is because, as I was having this argument on Twitter, somebody shared a meme, like a graphic made in response to this argument. And the meme that they shared, it had an iPhone, and it had various parts of the iPhone. And it linked them all to the Pentagon, military research, and U.S. government institutions. right? And the point being that government research created the iPhone, not the free market. Well, that's true, except this meme said nothing about the Soviets inventing the LED lights and nothing about the Soviets inventing the mobile phone. Well, I appreciate pointing out that in the United States, most of the inventions happen because of government subsidies, government involvement in the economy, I appreciate that point, but you have to give credit where credit is due. You don't have an LED touchscreen without an LED light. And it wasn't the Pentagon that invented LED lights. You don't have an iPhone without a mobile phone. And it was not the Pentagon that invented the mobile phone. And it's beyond me how you could make a meme, when libertarians are saying, oh, you must be retarded if you have a cell phone and you're a communist because, capitalism made the cell phone. And it's like it doesn't occur to them to mention that the Soviet Union invented the first mobile phone or invented the LED lights. But it does occur to you to say the Pentagon funded a bunch of research? Why are people in the socialist movement more interested in defending the record of the Pentagon than defending the record of socialist governments? It's beyond me. It's true. The Pentagon is not the free market, and the point stands. But why? Why does defending the record and the achievements of the Pentagon get priority over defending the record and the achievements of socialist governments? The premise of the argument is that socialism has never achieved anything. Well, the Pentagon never claimed to be socialist. It's government, but it's not socialist. It's a government capitalist bureaucracy. The Soviet Union was the union of Soviet socialist republics, and they invented LED lights, and they invented, the mobile phone. So why does that not come up? Because these people are so terrified of defending the bad guys that they feel compelled that they have to leave that out of the argument. Folks, Trotskyism is a cancer. And I'm using the term Trotskyism broadly, okay? People want to get argumentative and they'll say, well, they're not all Trotskyists, Caleb. Well, they're not all Trotskyists. Some of them are social democrats. Some of them are anarchists. They're not all Trotskyists. I'm using the term Trotskyism in a very broad sense. The pro-Western revolutionary intelligentsia. I use the term Trotskyism to refer to the pro-Western revolutionary intelligentsia. They are a cancer. They are very, very much a cancer. Very, very, very much a cancer. Folks, Leon Trotsky could have been a Proud Boy. Now, I'm being facetious, of course. That's a huge exaggeration. But what is the chant, the slogan of the Proud Boys? What do they chant at their rallies? West is the best. West is the best. Look at the videos on the White House. The White House on July 4th. Last year, there was a protest. The RCP lit an American flag on fire, and the Proud Boys showed up and rumbled with them and started chanting, West is the best. West is the best. West is the best. Well, Trotsky, he lived in New York City. And he wrote in his autobiography that New York City is the foundry where the fate of mankind will be forged. And he developed a theory called the theory of permanent revolution. The idea was that it didn't matter if the Soviet Union had socialism. It didn't matter if China had socialism. The only only place that socialism really matters is in the West. That the Soviet Union couldn't develop socialism in one country, that you have to have global permanent revolution because West is the best. The West is all that matters. That's the theory of permanent revolution. Right? But the Soviet Union shouldn't have tried to build a socialist society. It should have just been a temporary holdout to try and seize the West because the West is all that matters and the West is the best. That's Trotskyism. Well, Lenin, in his book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, pointed out that because of the aristocracy of labor and because of the way the world was developing, socialism was not going to come to the West. Oh boy. Socialism was not going to come to the West. The revolutionary energy was going to be in the East. And it would probably be more on the basis of national liberation that the working class would take power. And this is Lenin. He writes this. Read his writing on the national question. Read his writing on imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, imperialism, and the split in socialism. Lenin said that the revolutionary energy in the world was not going to be in that best West that Trotskyites love so much, but in the East. And Lenin was correct, right? The 20th century was, you had socialist revolutions in the East, and you did not have them in the West. Trotsky was wrong. But folks, if you really get down to what the revolutionary intelligentsia believes, what this middle-class revolutionary intelligentsia, what the Trotskyite element believes, they don't all like Trotsky, some of them are anarchists, some of them are... What they really believe is that the West is the best. With the Western left. That's what they believe. That's what Vosh believes. Right? Vosh, who's been appointed by Silicon Valley and you know, the video game Twitch or whatever, video game Twitch streaming or whatever, BreadTube, that's what Vosh believes. Vosh believes the West is the best. You saw it. He said that the United States is more of a proletarian state than China. The United States, with a capitalist economy, with big U.S. corporations that spread their tentacles all over the world and exploit people, is more socialist than a country led by a communist party that broke free from the chains of Western imperialism, used a state-controlled apparatus of production to raise people out of poverty. The United States, the Western capitalist United States, where profits are in command, where we have so little centralism, we can't even, you know, we've dealt with the pandemic worse than almost any other country in the world. According to Vosh, the United States is more socialist than China. That is what Vosh believes. The United States is more socialist than China. Those are his words. The United States is more of a proletarian state than China. Now, people can disagree about China, people can have their criticisms, but if you really believe that a Western imperialist country, is more socialist than a country that broke free from Western imperialism, you're a white supremacist, right? You're a Proud Boy. And that's what he believes. West is the best. That's what he believes. The only way you can possibly make a statement like that is if you are a blatant American chauvinist, American centrist, West is the best, white chauvinist. There's no way you can possibly think that. Think that the United States is more socialist than China if you are not a Western chauvinist. Vosh is that. And that's what he is. And Trotskyism is basically that, right? It's the belief that the socialist countries don't matter. Now, Trotsky said that the USSR was a deformed workers' state, or a degenerated workers' state, meaning that it did not have capitalism. It was not capitalist, but wasn't really socialist, because only the West could produce socialism. That was Trotsky's belief. Now, Max Shachtman was a follower of Leon Trotsky. Max Shachtman, along with Martin Aburn, and James Burnham, they disagreed with Trotsky. Trotsky said the Soviet Union was a workers' state. Max Shachtman, Martin Aburn, and James Burnham did not agree with that. In 1939, they all declared that the Soviet Union was not a workers' state. And there was a big split in Trotskyism. International Trotskyism divided in 1939. And the Trotskyites, who were fully anti-Soviet, not just kind of anti-Soviet like Trotsky, but full-on anti-Soviet, those Trotskyites left the SWP. They left the Socialist Workers' Party, and most of them became neoconservatives. James Burnham became a neoconservative. Max Shachtman, supported the Vietnam War, supported the Bay of Pigs invasion. Irving Kristol, he started the Congress for Cultural Freedom for the CIA, and then he later became the father of neoconservatism. The Shachtmanite Trotskyists, the Trotskyists who were so committed to West is the best that they were 100% anti-Trotskyist, anti-Soviet. They didn't even agree with Trotsky saying the Soviet Union was a deformed workers' state. Those folks became neocons. The third camp Trotskyists, who Trotsky referred to as the New York intellectuals, the Socialist Workers' Party composed a book exposing this clique within them. This is Trotskyists exposing other Trotskyists. Well, the leaders of Trotskyism wrote a book about this faction, and the book is called The Struggle for a Proletarian Party. And they referred to the New York intellectuals, a clique within Trotskyism that was middle class and loaded with petty bourgeois aspirations, that broke with Trotskyism, broke with the Fourth International. You can read it. And this is where the neocons came from. It's all very fascinating history. But the break, the divide that took place within the left, the Stalin-Trotsky divide, was really about, do you think the West is the best or not? Trotsky said that all that matters in the global revolution is the West. The Soviet Union was too backward and primitive to be socialist. Trotskyites eventually said the Soviet Union wasn't really socialist. Trotskyites eventually started working with the CIA against the Soviet Union, Congress for Cultural Freedom, Irving Howe, others. Eventually, you had Trotskyites becoming neocons. This is the basis of the divide in the left. But here's where it gets interesting, folks. See, I'm not that old. I'm 32 years old. For goodness sakes, I am not that old. I am a young man. I'm not as young as I once was, but I'm not 35. I'm 32. I'm not even 40. I'm not an old man. I feel so much in these lives, broadcasting. I feel like as I explain these concepts, I feel like a grandpa. I feel like I'm sitting here, back in my day, young man, there was a thing called the Communist Party. Yeah, well, I'm not that old. But I can remember a time, this is so sad because I'm not that old. I can remember a time where there was there was a much broader left. Okay? There used to be a much broader left. It used to be that, you had MLs, hardline anti-imperialists, the Communist Party, right? The Workers' World Party, the PSL. You had hardline anti-imperialists. And of course you had State Department socialists, right? You had, the kind of voices that dominate the DSA, the, pro-imperialist, anti-Marxist, anti-Soviet, 100%, third camp Trotskyists. You had those. But there was this huge, layer in between. Right? You had a lot of Trotskyites, Socialist Workers' Party, you had the Spartacist League, you had Maoists, Revolutionary Communists. You had a lot of people that weren't hardline anti-imperialists who always knew that U.S. imperialism was the main enemy. And you had State Department socialists who pretty much supported U.S. foreign policy. But there was this huge layer in between of people that maybe they weren't ready to be full, hard anti-imperialists, but they knew the Pentagon was full of lies. They knew that the U.S. media lied when it was time to go to war. They knew that U.S. imperialism was bad. They weren't ready to be full anti-imperialists, but they were suspicious of imperialism. Right? They would condemn the Soviet Union, they would condemn socialist countries, but they would march against the invasion of Iraq, they'd march against, the latest coup. They were in between. Right? During the Vietnam War, the Communist Party protested the Vietnam War, and Max Shachtman and the State Department socialists, Michael Harrington and others, supported the Vietnam War. But most of the left protested the Vietnam War. Most of the left said, you know what, maybe we don't like the Soviets, but we know that the U.S. Vietnam War is based on lies, and the Socialist Workers' Party, Trotskyites built big anti-war demonstrations against the Vietnam War. This happened, right? But, there was this big layer in between. Now it's not like that. Now you've got anti-imperialists. You've got genuine socialists, right? You've got, and there's not very many of us, right? There's the PSL, there's the Communist Party, there's, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, there's the Workers' World Party, there's, Jimmy Dore, there's Gray Zone Project, there's me, right? We're here. And then everybody else is a State Department socialist. If the Vietnam War happened today, Vosh would support it. And he would. And most of the DSA leadership would support it. And they would. Why? Why would they support it, Caleb? That sounds crazy. They wouldn't do that. Yes, they would. If the USA were to invade Vietnam today, in order to do it, it would make up a bunch of lies and atrocities. It would accuse the government of Vietnam of violating human rights. Right? There'd be a video floating around of some innocent puppies and human beings being slaughtered by the evil Vietnamese communists. And it would be fake. And, PSL and Gray Zone and Caleb and, the Communist Party, people, we would know it was fake. But Vosh would say that if you think it's fake, you're the same as a Holocaust denier. That's what he said to me. He said, if you don't believe what the U.S. government says about China and the Uyghurs, you're the same as a Holocaust denier. That's what they believe, right? And that they don't just believe this, right? They constantly on social media accuse anybody who has any questions about U.S. State Department propaganda of being the same as a Nazi. So yeah, if the Vietnam War were to happen today, if it was Vietnam if the USA was getting ready to invade Vietnam and social media was full of videos, purportedly showing Vietnamese atrocities, right? We would debunk the videos. I would debunk the videos. You would, the PSL would, or whatever. PSL, Gray Zone, Jimmy Dore would refute the videos. But everybody else would go, oh, if I refute those videos, I'm the same as a Holocaust denier. Oh, West is the best. And they would support it. They would support it. They would support it. And they would then try to demonize, scapegoat, and personally attack anyone who doesn't. And you know this. You know this would happen. You know this is the reality. You know this. Right? there used to be a much bigger left that would have gone, okay, we don't like the government of Vietnam, but you know what? We don't like the U.S. government. We know they lie. You're not allowed to know that they lie now, right? If you know that they lie, you get canceled. You get personally attacked, right? The culture has been created where if you do not repeat State Department propaganda against any government they tell you to hate, you are the same as a Nazi. This is what these people believe. Part of that means that you can't acknowledge anything the Soviet Union's ever done. Because if you do that, if you acknowledge that, then you're saying that the U.S. government lied, and then that makes you the same as a Holocaust denier. And it's just, it's the same as the libertarians, right? So why are these people socialists again? I have no idea why anyone in their right mind who believes socialism has failed everywhere it's ever been tried, never accomplished anything, why in the world would any of them become socialists? I do not know, but that's for them to figure out. But here's where it gets really interesting. I mean, and this is just the icing on the cake. The icing on the cake. I feel like I'm channeling Jason on Ruhe right now. Jason, we don't always agree with each other. I love you, but I feel like I'm sounding a lot like you right now. Third position. Jingo sock Dems. Jason loves to complain about the bad state of affairs. I'm here complaining about the bad state of affairs. So, I'm channeling Jason and Ruhe a little bit, despite our vast disagreements on many issues. But I just wanted to just touch on one more little aspect of the synthetic left, of the Trotskyites, of the revolutionary intelligentsia. And by the way, share this if you can, folks. Tweet this out, share this, make this a bigger conversation. The more the merrier. More people here, the more fun we have. Please spread the word, make this a bigger conversation. So, folks, what is the primary outlet pushing State Department socialism? What is the main media outlet, the primary media outlet that puts out the views of Vosh, the views of various radlibs, of various people? What is the primary media outlet? Jacobin. Right? Jacobin conveniently got announced on MSNBC when they started. Mainstream media outlets said, hey, let's just do a story about some socialist webzine happening. Right? Jacobin magazine. All right. Vietnam market reforms. This is DPRK. All right. Jacobin magazine. Well, folks, I didn't discover this myself. I don't take any credit for discovering this. It's not my journalistic work. It's the work of another journalist, Ben Norton. Ben Norton went and looked at the tax information to see who was funding Jacobin magazine. This is what he wrote. Quote, the pro-imperialist socialists at Jacobin magazine got over $230,000 a year, or $230,000 in 3 years from a right-wing pro-Israel group. In 2019 alone, the Jacobin Foundation got $141,000 from this Zionist organization. Jacobin purged its anti-imperialists and then started taking this money. This is also Ben Norton. 2019, this right-wing Zionist group, the Jewish Communal Fund, gave $77,000 to the Israel on Campus Coalition, a virulently anti-Palestine group, $86,000 to J Street, a liberal Zionist organization that whitewashes Israeli apartheid, and a whopping $141,000 to the fake socialist magazine Jacobin. This is in Jacobin Media's tax forms. Jacobin, and I hate to use these words because it's like people are going to have a fit, but that's my point. Jacobin magazine is funded by the Israel lobby. Now that sounds insane, right? If I said to you, hey, did you know Jacobin's funded by the Israel lobby? I would roll my eyes, because when someone starts talking about the Israel lobby controls, that sounds like an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Well, no, there is a lobby. There's a lobby in the United States that lobbies for Israel. One of the entities that it lobbies for Israel is called the Jewish Communal Fund, and they fund Israel on Campus Coalition, and they fund J Street. Well, this Israel lobby organization, not in the conspiratorial sense, in the literal sense, a lobby for Israel, not the Illuminati, not the thing high up on the thing. No, a group that lobbies for Israel, the literal Israel lobby, is the primary financial backer of Jacobin magazine. Now, a group that lobbies for Israel, Israel on Campus Coalition, J Street, is the primary financial backer of Jacobin magazine. Now, folks, I want you to wrap your mind around what I'm telling you here, because this sounds a little bit like too much, right? I mean, you may not understand the implications. They might be like, oh, Caleb, well, they got to get funding from somebody. But no, okay, here's not what you're not understanding. Vosh says that I'm a bad person because I work for RT, which is from Russia. Vosh says that I'm a bad person because I defend China. On almost every broadcast he does, Vosh is quoting from people who are funded by the Israel lobby. The Jacobin crowd, they hate Ben Norton, they hate Max Blumenthal, they hate me, they hate tankies and Nazbols. They harass us because they claim we're tied to governments around the world that are resisting American imperialism, when they are directly funded by the lobby of a settler state set up by Western imperialism. How in the world can anyone who calls themselves a progressive, a socialist, take money from Israel, but shame people for saying positive things or working or doing a job with people from Russia or from China or from Venezuela? I'm sorry, how in the world is it okay to get money from a settler state that is condemned by the UN, by the whole world for its oppression of Palestinians, but it's not okay to have anything to do with any country that might be resisting Western imperialism? How in the world can anyone with an anti-imperialist bone in their body make that leap? How is this possible? How do you do this? How in the world does that jive? It doesn't. There is no way for it to jive. I'm just being real with you. There is no possible way that works. Right? But it works if you think West is the best. Right? And that's what they think. They are Proud Boys. Deep down, they are left-wing Proud Boys. They think the West is the best. Israel's aligned with the West, so it's better. They're Trotskyites. All that matters is the West. West is the best. I'm here to tell you, folks, the West is not the best. The West is not the best. The free market system, liberalism, the ideology that puts individualism above all else is not the best. Right now, our country is crashing and burning because of Western ideology. The notion that there should be no collectivism, there should be no group effort, every individual for themselves, Ayn Rand, objectivism, compassion is weakness, greed is good, the market is always the solution. This stuff is killing us. Our country is coming apart right now. We don't have roads. We don't have purified water. Right? Our power plants are crumbling. There's a pandemic going on. We're handling it miserably. Folks, if it was ever more obvious that Western individualism, every man for himself, the government is best that governs least, if it's ever been more obvious that, if there's ever been a time where it's been obvious that that is not the answer, that you need cooperation between people, you need collectivism, people need to work together. If it's ever been more obvious, there's never been a time where it's been more obvious than this. There has never been a time where it has been more obvious than this that West is not the best. Liberalism, profits in command, greed is good, economics is not the answer. It's just not the answer. It's not the answer. And these people call themselves socialists, they call themselves leftists, but they are determined to make sure that nobody sees that. That nobody sees that. And that is something to be disturbed by. I'm sorry to be bitter. I'm sorry to be sectarian. I'm optimistic. Deep down, I'm optimistic. I think that real socialism will ultimately triumph, but it's going to require an ideological struggle. Right? We have a lot that we're up against. Right? There's a whole layer of bullshit that's been created. Right? But we're going to get through this. I'm confident. Right? The Center for Political Innovation. We're doing great stuff. Look, you have no idea how. Great things are happening. I meet new people all the time. Everything is moving in a very, very good direction. It's a great, great time to be doing what we're doing, right? The moment is here. Our work is cut out for us. But at the same time, folks, we've got to do it. No one's going to do it for us. No one is going to do it for us. Nobody is going to do it for us. No one's going to say what we're going to say. We have the obvious truth in our hands, but if we don't say it, nobody else will. Nobody else will. Our work is cut out for us, folks. Our work is cut out for us. Socialism works, capitalism doesn't, and really existing socialism is pretty solid proof of that, despite whatever flaws that went on. And there's been a whole layer of bullshit artists that have been set up to make sure that nobody acknowledges that. So we've got to do our work. That's it. That's all there is to it. Folks, I love talking to you all. I think that ends my opening spiel, my opening remarks. So please, folks, if you're just joining us now, please tweet this out. Please share this. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Please post this on Reddit. Please post this on Facebook. Please post this on Twitter. Make this a bigger conversation. The more people that are here, the merrier. Keep the super chats rolling in. I will answer your super chat. You may not like the answer I give, but I will give you an answer. And I think now is the time for our roll call. So names and locations, folks, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Don't forget to tweet this out. Don't forget to spread the word. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Portugal, Danielle Madruga is with us. Very good. Portugal. Australia, Oz Whistles. Norway, Arctic Angel. Vallejo, California, Jason Sarna. Albany, New York, Bill from the United States. Belize, Joey. Liverpool, UK, very good. Patrick in Los Angeles. Sam Levin in Los Angeles. San Jose. JT24, Mississippi. Isn't. Indonesia, Clydebank, India, Fairhope, Alabama, Chile, New York, Olympia, Poland, Don in Phoenixville, Milwaukee, Julian from Texas, Bermuda, DC Swamp, Nevada Desert, Farheed in California, Salem in Oregon, Springfield, Missouri, Allen Lee, Burbank, Taurus, Centura, Iraq, Tom in Pennsylvania, Mankato, Minnesota, West Virginia, Rio de Janeiro is with us. Very, very good. Iraq, right? Shanghai, China, Leipzig, East Germany, Atatist, Detroit, Vegas, Australia, John Doe. Greetings, Caleb, Ypsilanti, Michigan, Connecticut. Very good, very, very, very good. Denver, Colorado, Bonn, Germany. South Dakota, Hawthorne, New Jersey, Lockport, New York, Israel, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, Long Island, New York, Perth, Western Australia, Chicago, Illinois, Georgia, Dan from Iran, Shanghai, China, Cleveland, Pirate Alex, Miami, Florida, Toronto, Mo from Toronto, Canada, very good, very, very good. Nate from Sydney, Australia, very good. Southwest UK. Los Angeles. Faroe Islands. The Netherlands. South Florida. The Gutta. Brockville, Ontario. How are you tonight? Oh, thank you. I'm doing well. Anybody else? Roll call, names and locations. If not, we will do the super chats, keep the super chats rolling in. The Grand Circus, Florida. Very good, very, very good. Rusty, Culver City, California. Very, very, very good. Toledo, Ohio. I've been to Toledo, Ohio. Very nice city. Great time, says Jacob. Glad you're having a great time. Folks, please, if you haven't done so already, spread the word. Bring people on board. Get people watching. The more people here, the happier we are. We all have an obligation to build this community. It's very, very important that we all do our part, make sure people are here. So please spread the word. Spread the word. Very, very good. Very, very good. Very, very good. Folks, before we move on to the super chats, I just want to mention that it's beyond me that when I didn't even expose this, right? Ben Norton exposed that the primary funder of Jacobin is a Zionist organization. I didn't even expose this. I mean, it's old news. But at the time I tweeted this out, a number of people from this Radlib universe informed me that was anti-Semitic. And I don't understand how it's anti-Semitic, right? Pointing out that a publication that claims to be progressive, claims to be anti-imperialist, is associated with a country that is decidedly not progressive How is that anti-Semitic? I'm not understanding where the anti-Semitism is, but that alone made me a Nazbol and an anti-Semite, according to these people. You're not allowed to point out that Jacobin is funded by a pro-Israeli lobby group. If you point that out, you're an anti-Semite. Why? Why? I mean, all I said was, and I retweeted what the research of somebody else showing the main financial backer of Jacobin is the Jewish Communal Fund. And immediately these people are saying, you're anti-Semitic, you're anti-Semitic. And I don't get it. Like, that alone, you're not allowed to point that out. I mean, that's it. And it was amazing to me. And it made me wonder, like, there's a lot of, Trump has been a huge supporter of Israel. Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. There's legislation to outlaw boycott, divestment, and sanctions. Many states, to work for the government, you have to sign an oath that says you will never boycott Israel. This is all coming from the Republican Party. It's coming from the Republican Party, but I wonder how many of these Jacobin people, how many of these Vosh fans would support that. I think probably the big problem at the essence of this is that these people are not really socialists, right? I'd love to go on that show, and he said he would have me on. I will go on anytime. I'm a big fan. I think that part of the problem is that a lot of these Vosh fans are not really socialists, right? They are liberal anti-fascists. And by fascism, they mean anything that opposes the current order, right? That's really what it gets down to. Their understanding of what it means to be a leftist is we're against the right, and we call the right Nazis. That's really what they think it means to be a leftist. Folks, I will never forget being at the Left Forum, of all places. I think it was 2012. Yeah, 2012, I was at the Left Forum. I was at a workshop. There was a panel of different speakers from different socialist organizations. It was kind of a get-to-know-your leftist party panel. I was there to support the organization I worked with. And, it was kind of like speaker after speaker was just kind of explaining, what their group believed in. But then there was a Q&A, and the Q&A was pretty awful because it was mainly people trying to, gotcha different socialist groups. But there was one moment where there was a young man who I think was a teenager. I think he was not 18, but he raised his hand, and he was called on, and he said, "Isn't it true that fascism is also a response to an economic crisis, not just socialism?" And everyone in the room agreed, yes. And then he held up the planning workbook, or the schedule of the Left Forum. He said, there's a workshop here called Israel, the tool of the 1%. And he was panicking. He thought that the Left Forum, because it had a workshop called Israel, tool of the 1%, was fascist. And this kid wasn't just saying this to be, No, he was panicking. He really believed that the Left Forum of New York City was Nazi. Thoughts on future of internet? He really believed that. Based on what? Based on we're, having a panel about the economic crisis with different socialist groups, based on the fact there was a workshop criticizing Israel. He was yelling that he thought that the Left Forum of New York City was a Nazi gathering or something. That is a level of crazy that I cannot comprehend. Now, I'm not Jewish, right? I mean, I didn't grow up with relatives who died in the Holocaust. We need to be sensitive, okay? We need to understand that what my life and my family has experienced is very, very different than what different other people's lives have experienced. So we need to understand, I need to be more sensitive to that. I need to be more sensitive to what people have been through and the hardships, and people can be much more sensitive. But, we need to acknowledge hate crimes, anti-Semitism, okay. Right? There's a reason to be afraid. There's a reason that people should have suspicion. I understand that. And I would never want to belittle that. I don't want to belittle the Holocaust. I would never do that. I would never belittle the history of anti-Semitism. That's not what I'm here to do. That is not what I'm here to do. All right? But to think that the New York City Left Forum is a Nazi gathering because it has a workshop criticizing capitalism. All right, we'll talk about that. To think that the Left Forum in New York City is somehow the same as Nazis requires you to be so out of touch with reality. So out of touch with reality. So out of touch with reality that this is dangerous. I mean, that's really, really dangerous. I'm sorry, but if he thinks that at a conference about socialism in New York City that has one workshop about Israel is anti-Semitic, what do you think he thinks about a Palestine rally? Right? What if there had been a group of Muslims or Arabs waving Palestinian flags? Better yet, what if there was a group of Muslims and Arabs waving Palestinian flags, and the government announced it was going to murder all of them for being terrorists? Do you think he would protest that? Do you think he would oppose that? I'm just telling you. I mean, I have no idea who this man was, no idea what he's been through in his life, but he got up at the Left Forum in New York City, and basically accused the Left Forum of being a Nazi rally. I mean, that's where a lot of the Bosch fans are at, though. I mean, they see me and my years of anti-racist activism and can't tell the difference between me and a white supremacist. I mean, they hear me say, I one time, they think that at one point I tweeted that we needed a strong government to fight the rich and powerful, and they said that's the definition of fascism. These people are not opposed to capitalism. This milieu of radical liberal anti-fascists, they're not opposed to capitalism. They're opposed to, the rabble getting together and fighting for their rights. They're opposed to populism. They're opposed to average people organizing, right? They are afraid of the broad masses of people. They see the broad masses of people as the mob, as a scary group of inferior others who might possibly make demands. I mean, it's the level of anti-populism, right? Liberalism, right? Is very, very extreme. Very, very extreme. Right? I mean, the idea that calling for a government of action to fight for working families makes you a Nazi, that is so insane. I mean, what's this latest one? You can't criticize bankers. You can't criticize banking, right? That's another one of their rules. You can't criticize banking, right? That's Nazi, right? Apparently, if you criticize bankers, you are a Nazi. I mean, this is how these people think. I don't understand it. I don't understand it. And it's not socialism. It's not leftism. It's defense of the liberal order. That's all it is. But anyway, I've said too much about this, right? I've given this too much attention. And I'm optimistic because I think that real socialism will triumph, right? But there you go. Alrighty, so keep the super chats rolling in. We'll answer them all. Alrighty, Marx versus Bakunin versus LaSalle. First international drama. Okay, well, Karl Marx was an advocate of scientific socialism. Mikhail Bakunin was an anarchist, an advocate of individual terror. He talked about, the need for not a state after the revolution, but an association. And Ferdinand Lassalle, he was the ultra-leftist, right? Now, Ferdinand Lassalle, it's kind of interesting. There's a very good essay by Engels making fun of the Lassallians, right? The Paris Commune was led, the primary tendency in the Paris Commune was the Lassalle leadership, and the Lassalle, the revolutionaries of followers of Lassalle were ultra-left. He makes fun of the fact that they fetishize atheism, that they felt it necessary to destroy God by decree, the fact that they fetishize violence, they fetishize having secret meetings and clandestine activity. They all are focused on seizing the state, and they don't talk about class struggle and economics. That's Lassalle. Bakunin, anarchist, obsessed with left adventurous violence, and after the revolution, we're not going to have a state. We're going to have this thing called the association that makes sure no ruling class emerges ever again. And, that's the First International. That's why the term social democrat originally came into existence, actually. Originally, Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto because socialism was everywhere. All kinds of people were socialists back then, so Marx was like, I'm going to be a communist. Well, he started the International Working Men's Association, and a lot of ultra-leftist elements like Bakunin, like Lassalle, got involved, and those folks were using the term communist. So as Marx is trying to get away from these kind of ultra-leftist crazies, you have the emergence of building these social democratic parties. They went back to socialist or social democrat to avoid being associated with anarchists and ultra-lefts. But then, of course, the social democrats sold out and supported World War I, so then Lenin started using the word communist to distinguish themselves from the social democrats. So, these words are sometimes interchangeable. Their meaning changes in different periods. But ultimately, the goal of socialism is the banks, factories, and industries being organized to serve public good and not profits. That's the goal. The First International was an attempt to build an international organization fighting for that goal. Marx was the leader of it. Marx could not get along with the ultra-left elements that came to dominate the group. The First International collapsed. There was later the Second International, the Third International. That's the history of Marxism. So, yeah, it's important, right? A lot of people don't know what these internationals are. They think that it's like a meeting or something. No, it was an organization. It was an attempt to organize. And, the First International, there's still anarchists and stuff, but there's really no First International anymore. The Second International still exists. It's called Socialist International. It was dissolved before World War I, but they restarted it again, and it's still around. I think DSA used to be part of it and then resigned. It's called the Socialist International. The Third International, the Communist International, it was essentially, in theory, officially it was dissolved during the Second World War, but there are still kind of loose associations that you could call the Third International. They're not they don't function as a Third International, but there is the International Conference of Communist and Workers' Parties, I believe it's called, or the International Communist and Workers' Party Seminar, something like that. There's the World Festival of Youth and Students. There's the World Federation of Democratic Youth, the Women's International Democratic Federation, the World Federation of Trade Unions. These are organizations that are kind of loose gatherings of communist parties that were, ML communist parties. So those are kind of like the remnants of the Third International. Trotskyism was they tried to build a Fourth International. There's about 12 different Fourth Internationals, Trotskyites. Hugo Chavez at one point called for the building of a third or of a Fifth International, which I think is interesting. So there you go. Alrighty. The post-left trend. Well, I'm not really, I mean, people have been messaging me about this. I haven't seen this. These are like people that are like leftists but are now supporting Donald Trump or something like that. I haven't followed that. I don't support Trump. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm also not a Biden supporter. And I don't like the anti-Trump hysteria, but you can't approve of Donald Trump. A lot of his policies are really awful. There's no progress. I mean, there was just I mean, I was hopeful that maybe when he got in, he might do some good, but I mean, it's been 4 years of a disaster. So I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm not a Biden person either. So I don't quite understand this post-left trend, and I other than people telling me about, I have not seen it with my own eyes. Okay, so I hear people telling me about it, and that's it. Your thoughts on BN25 and right. Progressive International. That's actually a very good question. All right, writing it down. And we're going to get through all these super chats. All right. Superman USSR. Yeah, I read the comic books, right? It's Superman the Red Sun. It's the series where what if Superman was born in the USSR? It's entertaining. I mean, it's like what they call alternate history. I mean, obviously Superman was never, was not very real anyway. It's a fictional story, but it's like how would history have been different if the USSR had gotten Superman? It's amusing, and Batman is like a fascist who leads the United States, and it's like, because they have Superman, the Soviets win and stuff. It's kind of a wild comic book. I didn't realize they were making a movie of it. That should be amusing, right? I mean, that might be a fun movie. The Hollywood 10. Now, the Hollywood 10, they were screenwriters in Hollywood. Who were members of the Communist Party. And they were called before Congress. Congress was investigating the influence of communists in Hollywood. John Howard Lawson, Dalton Trumbo, and I don't remember the rest. There were 8 others, maybe. Eight. I mean, obviously there were 8 others because that's 2. But John Howard Lawson, Dalton Trumbo, I don't know the rest of their names, but they were called before Congress and asked to testify about other communists or friends of communists in Hollywood. They refused to do that. And so they were held in contempt of Congress, and they went to federal prison for that. Horrible. Right? I mean, obviously, compared to a lot of repression that has gone on in other countries, that's nothing. But, I mean, it was not good. And it ruined their careers, right? I mean, they couldn't work in Hollywood. They suffered a lot for refusing to name names. One thing that they did that was pretty neat, I think, is that they pooled their own money, and they made a movie called The Salt of the Earth, which is a very, very good movie about Chicano workers going on strike. So they pooled their resources and made a movie about the labor struggles of Chicano workers. I think that's very beautiful. They also made like a short little film called The Hollywood 10, just describing how undemocratic it was, and they referred to the House Un-American Activities Committee as the Un-American Committee. I thought that was pretty bold and pretty powerful. And it's pretty wild. I mean, Dalton Trumbo is probably the most famous. There was a documentary about his life, and I think they read the letters that he sent his son, and then they eventually made like a movie about his life. I mean, the thing with Dalton Trumbo was that, it's the only Academy Award that was never accepted, so he couldn't write for regular Hollywood. So he started using like fake names and other people to write Hollywood movies for other people. And he wrote a movie called The Brave One, which is actually pretty good. I don't know if you've ever seen The Brave One, but it's kind of it's a low-budget film about a young Mexican boy who wants to rescue his pet bull from a bullfight. It's kind of a feel-good, touching movie, right? About, this little boy loves his bull so much. And it's also very much supportive of the progressive side of the Mexican Revolution. It has some stuff in it about Abraham Lincoln and about the kind of the working class and the farmers of Mexico and the Mexican Revolution. It's a good movie, The Brave One. He wrote it under a false name. He couldn't write it, and he wrote it for this really low budget movie theater. But it's a good movie. It's just a touching story. So The Brave One ended up winning the best screenplay, but obviously Dalton Trumbo couldn't go and accept the award because he was blacklisted. So they read out best screenplay, The Brave One, by whatever his fake name was. Nobody ever could accept the award. The only Academy Award in history to never be accepted. And it was because of McCarthyism. That's fascinating. Another statistic, another thing about Dalton Trumbo is that, eventually Hollywood, as the blacklisting broke, he got back in. Finally, as the Hollywood blacklists were breaking at the end of the 1950s, early 60s, he made 2 movies. And, he wrote 2 movies finally under his own name. One of them is amazing, and it's called Spartacus. And I don't know if you've ever seen Spartacus. Spartacus is amazing. It's based on a novel. Spartacus is based on the novel written by Howard Fast, and it's basically using the slave revolt of Spartacus in ancient Rome to make an allegory for the Soviet Union and World War II. And it's an amazing movie, just an utterly amazing movie. I first saw it when I was very young and I didn't quite understand it, but later when I watched it in college, I understood that it was an analogy for fascism and the Soviet Union and World War II and the Popular Front, and it's amazing. I mean, go and watch Spartacus now. It's a great movie. And it was, it's a great movie, and a communist wrote it. The other movie that Dalton Trumbo wrote, though, was Exodus. And Exodus is not a good movie, politically. I mean, it's a well-made film. It's entertaining. I watched it. It's an entertaining film. But it's a pro-Israeli, film. It portrays Israel as a national liberation struggle, but that was the communist position, right? And Dalton Trumbo wrote Exodus as well. So that's Dalton Trumbo. There's John Howard Lawson, who I think was a playwright before he was, and these were just Hollywood writers who were sympathetic to communism. Because you have to understand, though, and this is what a lot of people don't get. Prior to the Second World War, in the 1930s, it was very, very, very common to be a communist, right? In Hollywood, on Broadway, on a college campus. It was pretty normal to be a communist, right? Roosevelt was the president. Roosevelt was in an alliance with communists. He invited communists over to the White House to sleep over and when they were called before Congress and stuff. And Roosevelt aligned himself with communists, right? And so the fact that a number of very skilled screenwriters, intellectuals, writers in Hollywood were communists was not that big of a deal. Book, Rex on USSR, China Economic Analysis. It wasn't really a big deal. It's not something we should be, shocked by. And they were blacklisted. They were written out of Hollywood, but a lot of them were just really good writers. I mean, they were top writers. These were not guys who had one script published. These were like full-time professional screenwriters. And eventually, the blacklist was broken, but they suffered and starved, and their families were quite, miserable at first. So. And the Hollywood 10 went to federal prison, for goodness sakes. So there you go. All right. Are Russian Eurasianists and Turkish Kemalists cooperating in the Caucasus? How on earth would I know that? I mean, am I in the Russian Caucasus? Am I a Kemalist? Am I a Russian Eurasian? I'm not a Turkish Kemalist. I'm not a Russian Eurasianist. And I'm not in the Caucasus Mountains. I don't talk to Russian Eurasianists. I don't talk to Turkish Kemalists, and I'm not in the Caucasus Mountains. So why in the world would you ask me that question? I mean, that is like a very, very, very strange question you asked me there, sir. I give every question an answer. And I'm giving you the answer now that I have no idea what Russian Eurasianists and Turkish Kemalists are doing. That's my answer. I hope that satisfies you. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, alrighty. Good books on China's humiliation. Well, look, I was going to recommend it later, but probably the best book on China that I've ever read that has the most information in it is the book When China Rules the World by Martin Jakes. That book is so loaded with information. Yeah. You want to know about China's history as a civilization, leading up to socialism and all that, I would read that book. It's a very academic book, lots of research. I learned so much from that book. That's the book I would recommend. All right. Elon Musk, oil bankers. I don't quite understand the question. Elon Musk certainly, marches to the beat of his own drummer. I see him as a little more independent, I guess, than, but I also, have questions about, his cars, and I don't see people driving them, and I don't quite understand him, and now the SpaceX, and he's an interesting guy. That's all I can say. Read somebody and Zhuganov. Well, I know who Zhuganov is. He's leader of the Russian Communist Party. It's Peasant War in Germany. Okay. Alrighty. Awesome. Okay. Zhuganov is an interesting guy. I met him. I've actually met Zhuganov. So, I covered the Russian Communist Party's presidential campaign in 2018. So I met Zhuganov, and he wasn't the candidate. I met Pavel Grudinin, who was the candidate, but there you go. Pentagon versus CIA. Well, there's a long rivalry between them in U.S. foreign policy. The Pentagon blows things up. Right? They're tied in with military corporations that make lots of money from tanks and bombs and guns, and they blow things up, and they have big, huge wars, and that's what they do. That's the Pentagon. CIA does the opposite. CIA, you shouldn't know that they're doing anything, right? If you know the CIA is involved, they screwed up. You're not supposed to know they did anything. It's covert work. The CIA is all about soft power and manipulating things behind the scenes and, using proxies and trying to preserve the image of the United States, make people around the world think positively about the United States, isolate U.S. rivals, etc. That's the CIA. The Pentagon does not care if you like them or not. They just want to blow shit up. Peace through strength is a Trump slogan, and it is also a slogan of the Pentagon, right? Pentagon does not care if the rest of the world likes the United States. They just want to be the strongest, biggest guy around. CIA is all about, slick maneuvers. That's, and this difference, I think, has really defined U.S. politics since the Cold War. Kennedy, before he was killed, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable." He created the Peace Corps, which everyone knows is a CIA front, right? The Peace Corps is well known to be gathering information for the CIA. That's what they do. But they also do nice things like, give health care to people and build bridges, and they do nice things, right? And it looks good for the United States, and it's tied to the intelligence apparatus. That's the Peace Corps. Well, Kennedy was basically arguing that in order to stop the rise of communists, the USA needed to be Mr. Nice Guy behind the scenes. Whereas the Pentagon was saying, no, we want to have a big, huge war in Vietnam. Kennedy was realizing that big, huge wars like the Korean War don't help the image of the United States. The Pentagon did not care if it helped the image of the United States or not. That divide, I think probably played a role in Kennedy's assassination. Furthermore, you can talk about Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a Pentagon guy, right? He was all about escalate the Vietnam War. He was all about that. Well, Nixon was removed largely by the work of the media and the press, right? The New York Times, the Washington Post, they went out, they exposed, and the press, handling the press is the job of the intelligence apparatus, right? Richard Nixon was this kind of strong man who was in with the military and in with the FBI and, crushed the Black freedom struggle, escalated the Vietnam War as much as he possibly could, and then when it was clear the USA couldn't win, got the heck out of there. Nixon, I think, was a military-industrial complex guy who was removed. The fight against him was the intelligence agencies struggling with him. Jimmy Carter was very much an intelligence agencies guy. Jimmy Carter said he was a student of Zbigniew Brzezinski. Almost everyone in his administration came out of something called the Trilateral Commission, which was like a think tank set up by the Rockefellers. And Jimmy Carter, they say he's the only American president who never went to war. He's got the reputation as the peace president. Well, he started proxy wars, right? Jimmy Carter, started the war in Nicaragua. He started the war in Afghanistan. He worked to undermine the Islamic Revolution of Iran and to protect the Shah. But, he was a soft power guy. His brother, Billy Carter, went to Libya and hung out with Gaddafi, and somehow Gaddafi ended up, supporting the United States in Afghanistan, and not siding with the Soviet Union, who was their ally. And Jimmy Carter was, he admits that he was a student of Brzezinski. He was all about soft power. He wore a sweater and he was nice. And, and that faction, the Eastern establishment, the ultra-rich that tend to be in with the intel agencies, they were for Carter. Reagan, on the other hand, right? Reagan was all about increasing military spending, Reagan was all about, rolling back and, escalating the arms race. And Reagan very much identified Carter with some of the soft power moves. And, Reagan said, let's make America great again. Reagan was for the military-industrial complex. This is a long-standing divide in the American, government apparatus. The Pentagon and the CIA have opposite interests with each other. And the Pentagon is tied to a lot of businesses in the United States that are manufacturing, right? So much of American manufacturing is military. Big supporter of Donald Trump right now is Bernie Marcus. If you go to a Home Depot, Bernie Marcus is the owner of Home Depot. If you go to a Home Depot, everything you will find on the shelf is made by a military company, somehow, right? Like the military is, the U.S. economy, it is subsidized by constant military spending. Top Pentagon contractors, General Electric, Boeing, Raytheon. The U.S. military is such an important part of the U.S. economy. General strike. Such a big part of the U.S. economy. Huge part of it. Meanwhile, the CIA and their think tanks, Council on Foreign Relations, Ford Foundation, that is the richest of the rich, the ultra-rich. That's who they're associated with, the people that are the Eastern establishment, right? So the ultra-rich, the intelligence agencies, the Rockefellers are all about slow growth. They want to slow down economic development. They want to stay at the top. They're more Malthusian. They're more about thinking long-term. They're managerial. The Pentagon, that's all kinds of business owners who just want to make profits, right? They want to blow things up, make profits. CIA wants to strategically plan things out. There's a division. This is a big division in the American government apparatus. And I did not come up with this. This is not my own discovery. The first book to really kind of lay it all out there, I think, would be the book The Yankee and Cowboy War, written by Carl Oglesby, and he goes into great detail about this. But there's also a very, very good book, not a very good, there's another scholar who's actually a mentor of Bill Clinton, a guy named Carroll Quigley, and he wrote a book called The Anglo-American Establishment. And he made this argument as well. He argued that there was, there was a section of the American ruling elite that was tied in with Britain that kind of, was at odds with the other sections and was more liberal. And this is, Bill Clinton, would praise Carroll Quigley all the time. He talked about the Anglo-American establishment. Then on top of that, you have, I would recommend also the work of Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party. He wrote a book called Generals Over the White House that showed that there was a tension, a rivalry between the military-industrial complex and Jimmy Carter. and how the military-industrial complex was basically working to remove Jimmy Carter, and that the rise of Ronald Reagan was very much a rise of the military-industrial complex over the more liberal Eastern establishment that backed Jimmy Carter. Yeah, there's a lot documenting this. This is not something I discovered on my own or anything. This is foreign policy analysts in the United States have long recognized this division between the Eastern establishment, the old money, New England, the ultra-rich, versus the Pentagon and the military industrial complex and the majority of American capitalists. So this is something that serious Marxists and serious policy analysts understand. And thank you for the super chat, much appreciated. This is something that those of us who think about this with any level of depth, will get into. So there you go. Should you associate yourself with the Western left? I mean, yes and no. I have always said, get out of the movement and get to the masses. Right? That we need to recruit average people. We need to stop trying to take over the protest cage. That said, though, I think there's a lot of people that are open. At DSA kind of places, at Bernie Sanders kind of places, there's a lot of people that are open and recruitable. But at the same time, stop trying to be king of the movement, right? The aim should be to get to the masses. The aim should be to build something better than the movement, not try to dominate the movement. So, yes and no. I think that what people call SJWism, IDPol, it's important to be sensitive, right? It's important to acknowledge that, the struggles that women have, the struggles that people of color have. But at the end of the day, right, that the SJW, not necessarily what they believe, but the vibe they give off. Shut up, white man. Stop mansplaining to me. No one likes that. No one likes that tone. Nobody likes that tone, right? That shrill, negative, call-out culture, nobody likes that. It's a very destructive, toxic tone, right? It's, who we're going to shame today. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes that, right? And so, it's one thing to be sensitive. I think people should be sensitive to the hardships people endure, but nobody likes the woke left. Nobody likes the SJW stuff. Get to the masses. We don't need chaos right now. We don't need people screaming and yelling. We need responsible worker politicians who go to the masses with a socialist program. That's what we need. We need people that wear suits and ties and clearly and coherently explain to the working class why we need a government of action that will fight for working families, and why socialism will make their lives better. Not why socialism will teach them a good lesson for being white Euro settlers, but why socialism will improve their lives, why racism is not the answer, why anti-immigrant bigotry is not the answer, but rather why we need the banks, factories, and industries to be organized to serve the people, not profits for a small group of owners. Right? Why do we need a government of action that will fight for working families? That is what we need. We need responsible worker politicians to lay out a revolutionary socialist program to the masses, right? I think a great example of a worker politician is Dust James, right? Dust James, he drives a truck for a living, but, on the weekends, he's wearing a suit and tie, and he is talking anti-imperialism, and he is very, very articulate, and he explains socialism and why it would be good for people in his neighborhood and his community. He is a worker politician. He's not a politician in the politician sense. He's not a Democrat or a Republican. He's not grandstanding. But he is engaging in politics as a worker. And he does so in a way that is coherent, is respectable, is clear, right? He is a worker politician, right? Yeah, I consider myself to be a worker politician, right? And we need more worker politicians, not politicians, but worker politicians, people that represent the interests of the working class and spread socialist politics to the working class, right? That is what we need. A new type of politician, a worker politician. Okay, is third position just jingoistic sock dems? Okay, so we have to be clear. I think this person, when they said third position, they meant third camp, right? Because there are fascist elements that call themselves third position, but I think that's not what he meant. I think he's referring to like third camp Trotskyists, right? The third camp left. And that was, during the Cold War, there was a section of the left that insisted they were on neither side. They were for the third camp, right? And this third camp did not exist. And they were very, it's kind of funny. They were kind of desperate. They were always looking for somebody to align with in every war. But they couldn't align with the Marxist-Leninist or pro-Soviet side. They also couldn't align with the U.S. imperialists, so they found like a magical third position. It was just a form of idealism, and it remains that way. And a lot of them, the thing is nowadays that CIA color revolutions and proxy forces are so important, these folks aren't really third camp anymore, right? During the early Cold War, it was very clear who was on what side, but now the United States, they didn't overthrow Gaddafi. The Libyan people just had this magical revolution. Well, most of the fighters weren't from Libya. They were foreign fighters shipped in by the United States. We don't mention that, right? Now, people that call themselves third camp tend to just be shills of imperialism because they deny the nature of the forces they support, but it didn't used to be that easy. So that's third camp or neo-Trotskyism as Shachtmanites, right? That's what you're referring to. Third positionists, you are referring to fascist third positionists. Well, fascist third positionists, they're not social democrats. Fascist third positionists are very, 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 very confused people. Very confused people that are racist, are white supremacists in the United States, but somehow that translates to supporting Gaddafi and supporting, China and stuff like that. And I think it's because, in the United States, there's been a huge effort to try to erode the image of the United States as a racist country and all of that. People that become like full-blown white supremacists, get very, very, very confused, and they're at war with the liberal order, so they start to have weird sympathies with China and North Korea and Libya and stuff like that. And their politics tend to be white supremacist. They're obsessed with race, and they hate black people, and they hate people of color. Somehow in their mind, that means also taking anti-imperialist positions internationally. There's a whole history of this. There was actually a fascist leader named Francis Parker Yockey, and he was probably the primary founder of this kind of thinking. Francis Parker Yockey. He wrote a book called Imperium, and he was an actual Nazi sympathizer. Like in the 1930s, he was an admirer of Hitler, and after World War II, he was a Nazi, but he decided that after World War II, because the United States had defeated the Nazis, that the main enemy was no longer the left, but it was the United States. And so on that basis, he started it started with him supporting Abdel Nasser, the Arab socialist leader of Egypt, because unfortunately Abdel Nasser made some anti-Semitic statements. So on that basis, as a Nazi, he was supporting Abdel Nasser, and he was a very, very confused individual. But, I guess he was so, as a racist and as a white supremacist, and as an admirer of Hitler, he was so at odds with the kind of liberal direction the USA was moving, with the civil rights movement and all of that. In his mind, somehow that translated to the Soviet Union were on his side or something. And it's very weird, and weird stuff like that happens. And it's a very strange case. You look into Francis Parker Yockey, very, very strange guy. And that the thing is, I guess, when it gets down to it, right, there has long been a conservative critique of capitalism, right? And I think that in his conservatism, in his fascism, he kind of had an admiration for authority, an admiration for traditional structures. And I think that because of that, he saw things in the way the Soviet Union became, in the way the Soviet Union developed, that he liked, and he thought were contrary to the liberalism of the West. And you'll see that. I mean, sometimes people that are deeply, deeply, deeply right-wing will feel that Western liberal values are so much of a threat that they will start to sympathize. I mean, this is weird. Like, I mean, there occasionally you'll see this, right? Somebody like Pat Buchanan will write an article, like admiring Fidel Castro or something. And it won't ever be because of the economics, and it will never be because of Marxism's ideology. It'll be like, Fidel Castro wears military uniforms, and I wish, American young people wore military uniforms. It's like they kind of have this like gut level admiration for anything authoritarian that kind of like gets them to sympathize a little bit with anti-imperialists. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when I was in school in the 90s. In the 90s, there was a lot, especially, I think it was in the 80s it was even worse, but in the 90s, there was a huge amount of admiration for the Asian tiger countries, right? That's Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. There was a huge amount of admiration for the Asian tiger countries in the United States among right-wingers, and I grew up around right-wingers, conservatives. Huge amount of admiration for the Asian tiger countries, right? And it wasn't based on the fact that the Asian tiger countries exercise more government control over industry. It was like admiration for the Asian tiger countries because they were so authoritarian, right? In Singapore, they cane people for, I don't know what, chewing gum, or you break the laws of Singapore, you get caned publicly, you get caned, and and the military is everywhere, and that some right-wingers that don't quite think about economics, they just, I remember they didn't admire China because they don't like communists, but, that there was some, like, I think I had a math teacher, and it was just this kind of like weird right-wing authoritarian admiration of the Asian tiger countries. And it wasn't based on anything other than kind of admiring authoritarianism, kind of admiring militarism, and you get that, right? You get that. And that was big, that was huge on the right. But the Asian tiger countries were mostly aligned with the United States, so it wasn't as extreme as the third positionist countries. But you will get elements of like the third position, that are kind of like those conservatives I grew up around who admired the Asian tiger countries for weird authoritarian cultural reasons. And, they're kind of like that, but a more extreme version is it's like, there's a book called The Cleanest Race, and it is an attempt to try and claim the government of North Korea are Nazis based on statements that they make about Koreans, right? They say things like Koreans are an amazing people. And it's like, North Korea has a number of Africans living in it. North Korea was a big supporter of the Black Panthers. North Korea has Palestinians living in it. North Korea has a record of internationalism, support for the people of Palestine, support for the people of Libya, support for the people of South and Central America that is a mile long, right? But there's this book that was widely circulated in the United States trying to say North Koreans are racist Nazis because they say Koreans are like the most skilled people in the world or something like that, right? And that's ridiculous, right? The record of the Korean people, right? North Korea's record of supporting Black liberation, supporting people around the world struggling for national liberation is massive, okay? Massive. But, there's a huge amount of propaganda from the liberal order claiming that North Korea are racial supremacists. So based on that, you'll get people that are racial supremacists who like North Korea. Now, that's pretty wild, isn't it? But that's how these things work. So, that's kind of, I think, what the third positionist movement is. That got way too much time. That got way too much attention. I shouldn't have talked about that much, because when it gets down to it, there really aren't that many third positionists, right? Most people in the United States that are white supremacists or racists are vehement supporters of American imperialism, right? And I'm telling you the truth. Go to any alt-right rally. They have helicopter means, free helicopter rides for communists. They don't like Hitler. They say that Hitler was a socialist, so he was left-wing. They love Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged, right? They have T-shirts that say Pinochet did nothing wrong, right? The alt-right, for the most part, are just pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist shills. There are some weird outliers. I debated one of them, this culture thug. I mean, he's an outlier. Most people on the far, far right don't think like that. The overwhelming majority of people that are white supremacist, racists, alt-right, the overwhelming majority of those people, are libertarians when it gets down to it. They're libertarians that are more openly racist, right? They're more openly racist, so. And a lot of them support Israel at this point because they hate Muslims, right? I mean, they hate Muslims so much that they support Israel because Israel kills lots of Muslims. I mean, this is, the far right is a cesspool, okay? And I think there is some confusion. I think some people, well, never mind. But the far right is a cesspool. I'm just telling you, the far right is a complete cesspool. And, and if some of them accidentally take some anti-imperialist positions because they're confused, I'm telling you, it's a very, 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 very small number of people. There are far more tankies than there are third positionists, by far. There are probably less than 30 third positionists in the entire United States. There are plenty of Nazis, there are plenty of KKK white supremacists, but the KKK white supremacists out there, the main reason that they are anti-Semitic is they think that communism, which is the most evil thing in the world, is a Jewish conspiracy, right? I mean, the people that are in the far right in the United States love capitalism. They love capitalism. That's the far right in the United States, right? They love capitalism. They hate communism. They think everything they don't like is a communist conspiracy. That's that. So, I mean, the third positionist current, they're on the internet, but they're not real. It's not a real political current. It's a very, 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 very obscure form of far right-wing politics. And when it gets down to it, they don't understand North Korea. They don't understand Libya. I mean, the guy I debated, Culture Thug, he admires Gaddafi, the socialist, anti-imperialist leader who wrote a book, the Green Book, which has got a section called Black People Will Prevail in the World, dedicated to fighting for the rights of Africans. He admires Gaddafi and Mussolini. You cannot admire Gaddafi and Mussolini because Gaddafi, his entire movement started with the resistance to Mussolini. Mussolini colonized and was the colonizer of Libya and killed millions of Libyans. And Gaddafi's parents, father, mother, fought against Mussolini. And the national hero of Libya was Omar Mukhtar, who was a Libyan who took up a gun against Mussolini. If you like both Mussolini and Gaddafi, you are insane. There is no way you can like both Mussolini and Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a response to the horrific crimes of Mussolini. One of the first things one big thing that Gaddafi did was he made a point. Mussolini built a church in Tripoli, in the Libyan capital. Gaddafi converted it into a mosque, right? You cannot, in order to admire both Mussolini and Gaddafi, you have to be so crazy you don't really understand Mussolini or Gaddafi. Mussolini was an imperialist, murdered millions of Libyans and millions of Ethiopians, right? He wanted to reestablish the Roman Empire, which was a historical abomination, right? He built a regime that was all about torturing people and publicly humiliating people, making them shit themselves, in public, and like dragging them through the streets as they shit themselves. I mean, it's just, forcing people to drink castor oil and shit themselves. I mean, it's sick, right? It's a regime of sadism and persecution. I see MMT. I'll get to that. Right? That's what Mussolini built. And of course, that regime was expansionist and was trying to reestablish the Roman Empire, wanted to conquer the Mediterranean, called it our sea, right? That's Mussolini's Italy. Gaddafi, right? Someone whose parents fought against Mussolini in Libya, somebody who, it was a movement about lifting people up, not just people in Libya, but all over the world, supporting the Palestinians, supporting the IRA, supporting the Black Panthers. Gaddafi was all about building things, lifting people up, empowering people. He was a particular friend of the dark-skinned Africans of Libya, he actually went as far as denouncing the fact that he was an Arab and declaring himself to be an African leader. And during the anti-Gaddafi revolution, one of the main things that the anti-Gaddafi forces did was lynch dark-skinned guest workers, right? Because Gaddafi had so many guest workers from Africa, and the policies for them were so good, right? Libya's in Africa, but there were a lot of guest workers from southern and central Africa. And the policies, were good to that. One of the main grievances of the anti-Gaddafi fighters was that Gaddafi had spent too many resources to help the dark-skinned Africans. The movement against Gaddafi was a racist movement. It was a movement of Arab and Northern African supremacists who hated dark-skinned Africans. So you cannot. The racists, the lynchers, the clan types of Libya were fighting against Gaddafi. So it's these people don't understand the politics, right? They don't understand the politics. That's okay if they don't understand the politics. They don't have to, But yeah, third positionism is, it's not even really worth talking about because it's small, right? As someone who has unfortunately interviewed people on the far right and had to cover competing demonstration, I'm telling you, the far right, there is nobody on the far right to speak of that has a bone of anti-capitalism in their body, right? And that the weirdos on the internet are a big exception, right? Most people on the far right are just like the libertarians. Only an idiot would ever believe that capitalism isn't the greatest system. Everything they don't like is a communist conspiracy. Everyone they don't like is a communist, right? Capitalism is the great system. West is the best. Come on. That's just all there is to it. All right. Vietnam market reforms versus North Korea. Well, first of all, the question was, why did Vietnam have market reforms and North Korea did not? That's the question. Well, the reason that Vietnam had market reforms is because Vietnam was aligned with the Soviet Union. In the 1980s, before the Soviet Union fell, they were able to have some level of industrialization, but they were unified, right? After the Kampuchea War, by about 1980, Vietnam was fully not at war, it was unified. The whole country was unified. They were getting aid from the Soviets. After the Soviets fell, after the fall of the Soviet Union, at that point, they started adopting market reforms because that was necessary, because they hadn't built a full socialist industry, and the whole country was unified, right? They were not at war. North Korea, half the country is still capitalist, right? And there's thousands of U.S. troops there. The USA is still technically at war with them, never recognized them as a country. So it's a very different situation. Very, very different situation. So, very, very different situation. North Korea was basically at war, has basically been at war since the time of the Korean War. Vietnam, Kampuchea War ended. They had some Soviet support. They had their own country. Very different circumstance. Very, very different circumstance. Thank you, Herb Bryant. All right. Thoughts on the future of the internet? I don't know. I worry about internet censorship, honestly, because, they already have this thing called the kill switch, that in a case of national emergency, they would just turn the internet off. That was created, I believe. Social media is being more censored than ever, than I've ever seen. And I worry about the future of the internet, honestly. I worry about it because, they are very afraid of people thinking for themselves, I'll tell you that much. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question. Update on the CPI, Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific book. Well, our goal is for it to be out at some point in December. You know, so yeah, I mean, it's in the works. You know, hold tight. We'll get you. We'll get you. We'll get to you. Don't worry. Don't worry. All right. Progressive International. Well, the Progressive International was kind of like an international gathering. Bernie Sanders was involved with it. A Greek economist, I think, was involved with it. Jeffrey Sachs, who used to be a big advocate of neoliberalism back in the 90s. Jeffrey Sachs, who now talks a little bit critical of Western capitalism. Jeffrey Sachs is involved with it. It was an attempt to talk about climate change internationally, to push for kind of Bernie Sanders-ish policies internationally. They're not socialists, they're not revolutionaries, they're not Marxists, they're social democrats, they're liberals that are concerned about global warming. It's probably the Jacobin kind of people. That's, the kind of people who would like Jacobin, right? Not really Marxists, just kind of liberal social democrats. Maybe they want worker co-ops or something, but they're not anti-imperialists, they're not revolutionaries, but they're better. You know what I'm saying? I think AOC, wasn't she promoting Progressive International at some point? Okay. All right, books on the USSR, China, economic analysis. Well, a very good book on the USSR and its changing economic policies is Socialism Betrayed by Roger Kieran. That is a very, very good book about the economic evolution of the Soviet Union. I strongly recommend Socialism Betrayed by Roger Kieran. It talks about the Soviet Union and its economic changes. That's a good book. I recommend Perestroika by Harpal Brar. Harpal Brar, the leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. He wrote a very good book called Perestroika, which is very good. What else would I recommend? On Soviet economy, there's a book called Cities Without Crisis that was published in the 70s. It was about the Soviet Union and how their economy functioned. There's a very good book called Human Rights in the Soviet Union, and it was written by Albert Szymanski, who was a U.S. intellectual who was originally a Maoist but moved into the pro-Soviet camp in the 1970s. Albert Szymanski's writings, he wrote a number of books, actually. He wrote a book on the Soviet economy called The Red Flag is Still Flying. I would recommend the work of Albert Szymanski. That's a good book. Now on China, you have to divide it up into different categories. Now I recommended When China Rules the World by Martin Jakes. That's the most thorough study of Chinese economics and the history of China politically. I would also recommend the book China, the Rise of a Civilization State. That is a very important book that is promoted by the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese Embassy. And it's the work of a Chinese academic, analyzing the role of Marxism in China's development. China, the Rise of a Civilization State. I would recommend that. Of course, I would recommend President Xi Jinping's writings. There's also a very, very good textbook that was published in about 1980, and it's called China's Socialist Economy. It was published by Peking Foreign Language Press. And I learned a lot by reading it. It's an official Chinese government textbook, but it gives a historic overview of their economy. China's Socialist Economy, published in 1980, talks about the Deng Xiaoping era reforms and their necessity. That's very good. I learned a lot from that book. I'm just, there are some interesting books published during the Cultural Revolution, that if you want to understand what was going on during that time, the economist Charles Bettelheim, I think he wrote a lot about the Cultural Revolution and how things were working. Edgar Snow, but this is that's before, right? If you want to talk about modern China, Martin Jakes, When China Rules the World, China, the Rise of a Civilization State, China's Socialist Economy, Xi Jinping's writings, that's where I recommend you go. Peasant War in Germany. It's a very important book by Friedrich Engels, right? And that the peasant wars in Germany kind of forced the capitalist overturning of feudalism to eventually happen. The peasants rose up against their oppression, and a lot of times they did it in the name of Christianity. They established Christian communes and such, but the peasants of Germany were oppressed by feudalism, and they revolted. And Frederick Engels devoted quite a bit of time to studying these revolts from a Marxist perspective, what inspired them, what role did they play, and Martin Luther, who was a huge critic of the Roman Catholic Church, started the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther hated the peasant uprisings and supported the crushing of the peasant uprisings. So it's complicated, right? And that Frederick Engels' important work, The Peasant War in Germany, gives a very good analysis of what was going on. And this is the important thing. Throughout feudalism, there were constant peasant uprisings, but they did not overthrow feudalism. Eventually, feudalism would be restored because they adopted the same mode of production. Right? The form of farming that they had, after the peasants would overthrow the landlords and the nobles, they would still have the same mode of production. Right? It was just, the peasants would rise up and hold the land in common, have a commune or whatever, and share the land, but it would still be the same mode of production as it had been under the landlord. It's just, it was run in a more egalitarian way, but it was still the same subsistence farming mode of production. It wasn't until the rise of the mercantile class that a higher mode of production existed and feudalism could permanently be overturned. Many times in many countries that had feudalism, there were peasant uprisings that overthrew feudalism in one area or another, but they never led, and especially to China's history, thousands of years of peasant uprisings in China. Thousands of years. There's the Taiping uprising in the 1800s, but thousands of years there were peasant revolts in China and all over the world. Peasants in feudalism don't like to be oppressed, right? I mean, the peasant has no rights. He's oppressed, right? He's the property. He's almost a slave, right? Well, the peasant revolts. I mean, that happens, right? In Germany it happened. Russia it happened. But until a higher mode of production emerges, as long as the revolutionaries who overthrew the feudal lord still have the same mode of production, they never are able to really, really permanently overthrow feudalism. Only does feudalism get overthrown when a higher mode of production emerges. That is the only way that the old system can ultimately be destroyed, is when a higher mode of production emerges. And that is the problem that the socialist countries have had. The socialist countries have overthrown capitalism. They've organized the capitalist mode of production, not for profits, in a centrally planned, rational way. But we still haven't gotten to a higher mode of production. We still have industrial production. But the computer revolution is kind of laying the basis for that. And Nelson Peary, who is a brilliant revolutionary writer, he wrote a very good book called The Future is Up to Us, where he laid that out as well, right? That understanding that computers, more than anything, are going to lead to communism, right? That computers are, by eliminating the industrial proletariat, that is what will ultimately lay the basis for communism. General strike. So what is a general strike? Right? I mean, I think that I can think of three understandings of it. So the first concept of the general strike is that it was mainly syndicalists and anarchists had this notion that one day all the workers would go on strike in the entire world and refuse to work. The great general strike, and that would lead to socialism. And it was almost kind of like their Armageddon myth. It was this like fantasy that they had, this one day all the workers in the entire world would not go to work, right? It was the IWW believed it, the syndicalists of Europe believed it. It was kind of like the second coming of Jesus or something, except for anarcho-syndicalists, anarchists, some Marxists too, and it was a fantasy, right? Rosa Luxemburg wrote a book criticizing this notion called Mass Strike. It was a little bit of an illusion. That's not how history works. But it was it was a myth that like the 1800s to like early 1900s socialist movement believed in. So that's like the first concept of general strike is that, right? The global, the one day of reckoning where all the workers refuse to work and seize their factories. Well, that didn't happen. And it won't happen because that's not how history works. But that's what you call, that's the first concept. The second concept is what you call municipal general strikes. And that's basically where a labor union gets strong enough that it sets up a strike committee and shuts down the economy of an entire city. That has happened a number of times in American history. The first time it happened, I believe, was in Seattle in 1919, right? The labor union, the union committee shut down the city of Seattle. 1919, they shut down the city. That was huge. Anna Louise Strong was involved. The Industrial Workers of the World was involved. That was big, right? The workers of Seattle refused to go back to work. They shut the economy down in order to win their demands, and the Union Labor Committee ran the city. It was like a state of dual power. It's a state of dual power, basically, right? It's the first big general strike. You had 3 general strikes in the summer of 1934. You had a general strike in San Francisco. The dock workers, the dock workers of San Francisco, they went on strike. They refused to go to work, and the rest of the unions in the city went along with them, and, that was that. It was big, and it eventually created the International Longshore Warehouse Union, and it was a big, big moment. In Minneapolis, the Teamsters Union, led by Trotskyites, shut down the city of Minneapolis in the summer of 1934 and seized it, and that was a big general strike. And in Toledo, Ohio, there was the Auto Light General Strike of Toledo, Ohio, and that shut down the city. I mean, it was a general strike where, the labor union associated with the Communist Party, also associated with a social democratic formation called the American Workers' Party. They shut the city down in Toledo, Ohio. And those were the 3 big general strikes of 1934. And, those were 3 cities in the United States that a communist-led strike committee basically shut it down. So that was that. Then there was in 1947 in Oakland, California, there was a general strike. In 1947 during the post-war strike wave, the city of Oakland, shut down. There was a stronghold of the Communist Party and labor unions. It was the beginning of McCarthyism, but they were able to have kind of a last hurrah. It was a big general strike in Oakland, 1947. So we've had municipal general strikes. It's where one labor union in a city goes on strike, a big labor union like the truck drivers or the dock workers or the auto light, power plant workers, go on strike. And then the rest of the unions in the city go on strike with them, and the union strike committee kind of becomes the I don't know what you want to call it. It becomes the new the dual power institution, I guess. All right, modern monetary theory. I don't know enough about it. I'm a little bit suspicious of it. I mean, it sounds good. I mean, the government can fund itself by printing money instead of taxing people. I mean, that would be good, right? I'm open to hearing about it. Something about it doesn't quite sound about right, but I'm open to it. I mean, modern monetary theory sounds good. The way the Federal Reserve System works is pretty awful. I mean, we get ripped off. I mean, it's pretty awful. No question about it. So, yeah, there you go. All right, folks, my voice is tired. It's late. I need to get home. I hope y'all have a good Thanksgiving. I might be on tomorrow during Thanksgiving. Might not be. I'm not sure. But I hope you all enjoyed the broadcast. So thanks for being here. Glad to talk to you all. I guess we'll wrap it up. All right. 3, 2, why am I counting down? I don't know. All right. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. And don't forget that we need a government of action to fight for working families. Have a good